We've got a lot to cover here this week in our Futato exercises, so let's jump in here to lesson 26. What we're looking at is the Vav relative plus the quote-unquote imperfect. It's important for you to realize if you go on in Hebrew, we're calling this the Vav relative imperfect because it looks a lot like a Vav relative attached to an imperfect. The jussive is really the form here. The jussive and the imperfect frequently look identical. But what you'll notice is when you get a third hey or you get a hifil or something like that, this isn't going to look like a Vav relative plus an imperfect. It's going to look like a Vav relative plus a jussive. So good idea to just think of this in terms of Vav relative plus the jussive rather than the Vav relative plus the imperfect. The reason why they say imperfect is because the Vav relative also goes on what looks like the perfect. So it's easy to remember the perfect and the imperfect rather than the perfect and the jussive. But I think you'll be less confused down the road if you recognize that the Vav relative actually attaches to the jussive form, not to the imperfect form. Again, even that's a little bit off because technically, I can't remember if I went over this in a previous conference for this class or if I went over this in my intermediate Hebrew course. But really, you've got three forms that look identical a lot of the time. You know about the imperfect and the jussive. Those often look identical. But there's also a form called the narrative preterite, and we may just refer to it as the preterite. But the imperfect, the jussive, and the preterite frequently look identical. The imperfect and the jussive frequently look identical, but there are times when they differ. Third hey verbs, hifil, that sort of a thing. The jussive and the preterite, as far as I know, always look identical. So technically speaking, it's not even the Vav relative plus the jussive, it's the Vav relative plus the preterite. But this is sort of a, I guess from a historical perspective, a newer way of looking at what's going on with the Vav relative. And so not everybody is using this terminology. The good thing about thinking of it as the Vav relative plus the preterite is it makes a lot more sense why we translate it as past tense. Preterite is just a word for like the simple past tense. If you've had Spanish before, you'll know that term. So all that to say, and even this terminology Vav relative, some grammars are going to say Vav consecutive. Some are just going to call it the vayik tol, because when you put the Vav relative on the paradigmatic katal form, that's the way you would pronounce it, is vayik tol. So some people just call this the vayik tol form. So just a little bit of preface there to how you may end up changing the way you think about what we're calling the Vav relative imperfect as we go forward. All right, enough said about that. We'll go through here and start our parsing. Like I said, we got a lot to get through today, so let's jump in. Number one here, we can obviously see the Vav Patak Dagesh. I've mentioned before that the Vav relative kind of looks formally, spelling-wise, a lot like the definite article on a noun or an adjective or a participle. The Vav relative has a similar pattern on a verb. Obviously, it doesn't use the hey, and it certainly doesn't function the same way as the definite article, but that patak dagesh that you see, consonant patak dagesh, that's a good way to recognize the Vav relative, because a similar thing happens to the Vav relative when it comes up against a guttural as what happens to the definite article. So definite article could be patak dagesh, or it could be kametz when it's in front of a guttural that can't take the dagesh. The patak lengthens to a kametz. So the reason why I draw that comparison with the form of the definite article is there's going to be times where the Vav relative changes its form, just like the definite article changes its form depending on what it's connected to. Okay, enough said there. Vav patak dagesh, you can account for that as the Vav relative. Then we're left with yiv tak. At this point, it's just parsing like normal. Yivtak, yod heuric prefix, indicates cal imperfect, third person, masculine. Lack of suffix indicates singular, so this is a vav. You could call this, I guess, a cal vav relative imperfect, I guess is what we're going to call the conjugation here. 3ms of batach. Okay? So as we go through, this is really just parsing like you're used to for the cal imperfect, but you're recognizing the vav relative on there now. So again, the number 2, va evtach, the vav relative goes to vav kametz instead of vav patach dagesh, because the aleph here can't take the dagesh of the vav relative. So it rejects the dagesh, the patach lengthens to a kametz to compensate, just like you would expect in the case of, say, a definite article. So here again, we get cal. We can see the aleph segel prefix indicates a cal. Vav relative imperfect, I guess we'll say, or vav relative jussive, or vav relative preterite, or you could just say vayiktol. We've got a cal, vayiktol, vav relative imperfect, whatever. Aleph indicates 1 CS, and our root is batach. Number 3, again, here's our vav relative, vav, patach dagesh. We take that off, we get na-kam. Okay, so na-kam, we might think to ourselves, how many letters is a Hebrew root supposed to have? 3. How many do I have once I get rid of the vav relative? 3. Okay, so na-kam, maybe our root is na-kam. Well, that's not a root I've seen before, so maybe I go look it up in the lexicon. Well, I go look up na-kam in the lexicon. Let's just do that real quick and see what happens. Bring this over here. Type down Nun Kof Mem. Okay. Huh. I get a root here. And let's see, in the cal, which I would think cal, because I've got a comets in R1, but cal should be comets patach. And that's not what I get here. I get comets comets. So let's just look through here and see if we can make sense of this. None of these forms that I'm getting for nakam really seem to fit. Nakam itself means to take revenge or to avenge oneself, at least in the cal. But the forms don't quite make sense. I can't explain why I would have a comets. Oh, actually, now I can. But it gets tricky. See, I'm trying to approach this as if I've never seen this word before. I'm trying to go through my parsing methodology to kind of really investigate the clues and figure out what's happening. But I've already missed a step, kind of. I could say, how do I explain this? If this is a perfect, if this is a cal perfect form of nakam, why does it have a kametz here instead of a patach? There is actually an explanation for that, but it's going to reveal that I've already made a mistake. The explanation for that would be, if you remember, when the vav relative gets attached to an imperfect, it pulls the accent toward the front, which would mean that I now have a closed, unaccented syllable. And in Hebrew, a closed, unaccented syllable wants a long vowel, or what Futato calls a medium vowel. So that would make sense. But I've just conceded that that happens when the vav relative is on the imperfect. And I've been supposing that this is a perfect. Excuse me. The vav patach dagesh shows me it has to be imperfect or preterite or jussive. The vav patach dagesh means this can't be perfect. So if this can't be perfect, how do I explain what's going on here? If this has to be imperfect or jussive or preterite, that means I definitely have a prefix, and so nun would somehow have to be part of that prefix. Now, if nun is part of the prefix, my options get a little bit more limited. I now have, first of all, my root becomes kof mem, so I have to figure out, am I missing something? Am I missing the R1? Am I missing the R2? Am I missing the R3? What are my options here for kof mem as a root? So let's just think through that. If that's the case, kof mem, what if I'm missing R3? What if this is kama? Okay, well, let's try kama. Okay, well, we get something here. Kama. Kama is a participle of kum. So kama is not a root. So it can't be that. What if I'm missing R1? If I'm missing R1, there are two situations where that happens, either a 1 nun or a 1 yod. In the 1 nun situation, the nun will assimilate into R2 most of the time. And that hasn't happened here, so it's probably not R1 nun or a 1 nun. What about a 1 yod vav? Because remember, if it's a true 1 yod, the yod will still be here in the form of a prefix vowel. So if it's a 1 yod vav, what happens? Well, in a 1 yod vav situation, I get a sere prefix vowel. That's just what happens in the 1 yod vav situations, and I don't have that here. And actually, the prefix vowel helps me, it is a little bit of a clue to what's going on as well. So I've already eliminated that I'm missing R3. I'm not missing R3, I'm not missing R1, I must be missing R2. And as it happens, when you're missing R2, that's called a hollow verb. In hollow verbs, the prefix vowel is a kametz. Okay, so that seems to be what's going on here. I've got kum, well, I should say I've got a hollow verb with kof mem. Okay, what hollow verbs do we know, have we learned with a kof and a mem? Well, kum is the verb that we've learned. So the root here would be kof vav mem, kum. And the nun would indicate, well, first of all, I think we're all looking at, let me see what we've done as far as, oops, come on, I have to remind myself what we've covered here and what I've covered in other classes. So here we are. Okay, we have not yet gotten to the other patterns. So nun would have to then be a sign of the imperfect, and we know we're in the cow because we haven't done nifal, pl, pual, hifil, any of that yet. So we know we're in the cow, which means the nun is part of our prefix. Nun is going to indicate 1 CP, and the root is kum. So we've got this parsed out as cow, vav relative imperfect, or vav relative jussive, or vav relative preterite, or maybe just vayiktol, whatever you prefer here. Cow, vayiktol, 1 CP of kum. And that would be translated as, remember, the vav relative is going to get translated as a past tense. So this would be, we arose. Even though it looks like an imperfect, the vav relative actually attaches to the preterite, which is a past tense. So, we arose would be our translation here. Or, and we arose. Then we arose. Something like that. All right, number 4. Again, we've got the vav patak dagesh, so we're pretty sure we've got a vav relative here. Take that away, we get tivin. Okay, well, tivin, how many letters are we supposed to have in a root? 3. How many do we have? We have 3. So maybe our root is tav, beit, nun. Well, we get tav, beit, nun, but teven is a noun. This is not a verbal root. So it can't be tav, beit, nun as our root. That must mean that one of these 3 letters is a prefix or a suffix or something added. And if something's added and we have 3, then we're probably missing a root letter as well. So what's been added? Do we add nun as a suffix? Well, we add nun as a suffix in the imperfect feminine plurals in the form of noon, comets, hey, but we don't have a comets, hey here. We add noon as a suffix in the Cal Perfect 1CP as new with a shurik, but we don't have a shurik here. We add noon as a suffix in 10, the 10 suffix of the Cal Perfect 2 FP, but we don't have 10, we just have noon. So noon doesn't really function as a suffix here. So that means it must be part of the root. And if noon is part of the root, then we have to ask, what about bait? Bait, unless bait is, well, let's put it this way. If noon is not a suffix, if noon is part of the root, then bait either has to be part of the root or it has to be a prefix or part of the prefix. So we could ask, is tiv ever used as a prefix? No, we don't get a tiv prefix that includes the bait. So the bait must be part of the root as well. Well, we know that tav bait noon isn't a root, so that must mean that tav is a prefix, or at least not part of the root. That's fine. That makes sense. We get a tav prefix in the Cal Imperfect a lot of different ways. So let's just say that's what we've got. We've got a bait and a noon as our root. We have to figure out now what's missing. Are we missing the R1, the R2, or the R3 letter? If it's the R1 letter, it would be a noon or a yod. If it's a noon, it's going to assimilate into R2, which we don't have happening. So it's probably not a 1 noon. If it's a 1 yod, we're going to get a sere prefix vowel, which we don't have. So it's probably not a 1 yod. We're not missing the R1. What if we're missing the R2? Well, there's a couple problems with that. First of all, the only bait noon verb that we've learned that's hollow is bean, but hollow verbs aren't going to have a heric prefix vowel. They're going to have a kamets prefix vowel. So we're not missing R2. We must be missing R3. When we're missing R3, it's probably a third hey verb. So let's put a hey back in there. Bait, noon, hey. Is bait, noon, hey a root that we're familiar with? Well, yeah, bana. Okay. So we've got bana then, most likely. Again, that works. It doesn't mean there isn't maybe another possible explanation out there. So we hold that tentatively. But if we've got bana here, everything starts to make sense. Why is it tivin instead of tiv with a silent shavah here, ne, noon, segel, hey? That's the form we would expect with an imperfect, tiv, ne. But we get tivin. Well, this is what happens when you have a third hey verb in the jussive. Remember, the jussive form shortens for third hey verbs. And so we lose the third hey, and that segel that we would usually have in the R2 letter jumps back to the R1 letter, and that's why we get tivin. The accent mark has shifted to the tav syllable. So Vaitivin would be a cow, vav relative jussive, or vav relative preterite, or vav relative imperfect. It's not really an imperfect. This would have to be a jussive. But a vav relative something, it's definitely not perfect. I might say vav relative preterite or just vayiktol. And the tav prefix with no suffix indicates that what we're looking at is either a 3fs or a 2ms. And our root is banan. All right. Pretty straightforward. Let's look at number 5. Number 5 leaves us in a very similar situation. The only difference here is the vowels. All right. But we do have it is important to note that we have a short vowel. Okay. So we don't have heric segel, we have patak patak. But the reason for the difference here is the ayin. The ayin wants an A-class vowel. And so the ayin determines that the patach here, or that the prefix vowel is patach, and it also gives patach as its vowel. That makes perfect sense as a cow, vav relative of, again, a third hay jussive. Allah would be our root here. I'm not going to go through the same steps that I did with Tivin, but you can see how bana as a third hay verb loses its third hay. Here, Allah as a third hay verb loses its third hay. All right. Let's see what else. I think that's... so we've got Allah as the root. Pattern is going to be cow, obviously. Vav, relative, imperfect, jussive, preterite, whatever, vayiktul. And then the tav, once again, the tav prefix with no suffix indicates either 3fs or 2ms. All right, number 6. Here we've got vayitain. Right, vayitain. This is that unusual natan. Okay, we can tell that we've got a 1 noon here. The noon has assimilated into the R2 letter. You see that doggish there? So we've got natan, and one of the irregularities of natan in the imperfect, jussive, preterite, whatever, is that the theme vowel is a sere rather than a patach or a holum. But everything else is pretty straightforward. We've got a cow, vav relative, imperfect, jussive, preterite, whatever, vayiktul, and the yod prefix with no suffix indicates 3ms of natan. Number 7, we've got the vav patach dagish. We take that off. We're left with tasem. Tasem. First thing to note, because you're probably expecting that the tav here is a prefix letter because of the vav relative form here. You know that this goes on a prefixed form. So tav is almost certainly your prefix letter, which means your root starts with the som. So your root is som mem. So you're already missing something. So are we missing something from, are we missing the third root letter? Sama. Are we missing the second root letter, where it would be either seem, sum, or som? Note, we have had seem as a hollow verb. Or are we missing an R1, which would be either nasam, which we don't have because the noon doesn't assimilate into a dagesh, or yasam with a 1 yod vav, but that doesn't happen because we don't have a sere prefix vowel. But we do have a kametz prefix vowel, which is indicative of a hollow verb. So all of that together shows us that the root here is probably seem, sin yod mem, which means he put. Well, actually, the lexical form means to put, because the lexical form is infinitive construct. And this gets conjugated as a cow, vav relative, imperfect, jussive, preterite, whatever, vayiktul. And the tav prefix with no suffix indicates either 3fs or 2ms. If this were 3fs, our translation essentially would be she placed, or and she placed. Remember, the vav relative on the preterite form here is past tense, preterite, jussive, imperfect, whatever. The vav relative there with that form, the vav relative plus the prefixed form indicates past tense. It's probably the best way to say it. All right. Number 8. Number 8, we've got vav patach dagish. Take that off. We get yev. All right. This one's a little bit tricky. Okay, because there's a couple things that might mislead you. That sere is going to be a little bit misleading. The double shavaz at the end are going to be a little bit tricky and a little bit misleading. Take a swig of coffee here before I dig in. You don't need to know I'm drinking coffee, but I just like to explain the pauses, why I stopped talking for a couple seconds. All right, so we've got, again, the Vav, Patak, Dagesh gets added to a prefixed form. So we know the yod is part of the prefix. It's not going to be part of the root. So we can take all of that off. We're left with bait, cough. All right. So since it's going to be tricky, let's just stick to our parsing methodology. Let's just walk through this and see what our options are. All right. So option number, what I usually start with, unless I know this is the answer, then I start the other way so I can still walk through it. What I usually start with is, what if we're missing R3? Okay, so let's just go there. Now, I know we're missing R3 because I know this word, but I want to walk through all the options because if you don't know what this is, you're going to get a little bit confused by some of the morphology here. So let's just start with we're missing R3. R3, if we're missing R3, that's usually a third hay verb. So our root would be bait, cough, hay, baka. Sure enough, that is a root that we have learned, baka. Now it's a little bit weird that we've got a sere here because most third hay prefix forms would have a heric. And then basically the imperfect form yiv ke, that segel hay, the segel would usually bump over into the bait, the R2 letter, or well, I guess this is R1 if we've got baka, and that hasn't happened here. So the verb, or sorry, the vowel pointing is very inconsistent with a third hay. So that might give us a little bit of pause, but at least the root makes sense. Baka is a root that we know. So we'll kind of hold that off to the side, and that's option 1. Option 1 is that the root is baka. Option 2, maybe we're missing R2. Maybe this is a hollow verb. So what hollow verbs have we seen that have a bait and a cough? Basically, it has to be either bich, boch, or buch. Now, I haven't seen any of those. That doesn't mean, let's pretend we're reading in our Hebrew text. Just because I haven't seen it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. So let's go to our lexicon and let's look up bait, yod, cough. We get nothing. Let's look up bait, vav, cough. Okay, here we get something. Buch or boch, we can't really tell here. It looks like it's going to be boch, the way that it gets pointed down here in the perfect. And it only occurs in the nifal. It means to be disturbed. Well, if it only occurs in the nifal, this ain't it, because we know this is not nifal. We primarily know this is not nifal because we haven't had nifal yet. But even if we had nifal, the nifal is going to look different than what we've got here. So, unless the lexicon's wrong, and this is a form of buch that we've never seen, probably not buch. The only way to really know is to, in context, use this meaning and see if it makes sense. Because, hey, lexicographers are humans. It's possible they made a mistake. It's possible they missed something. Probably not a good idea for an elementary Hebrew student to challenge the lexicographer because he has a ton more experience, and it's unlikely you found something that he didn't. But it's not impossible. So, hey, maybe we'll say option 2 is both. Maybe it's still the vowels don't make a whole lot of sense because we would expect to have a kametz here. We would expect probably a shurik here for a short, basically in this shortened form, this preterite or this jussive form, the O class vowel is going to go to its short component, which would be a kibbutz. So anyways, vowels don't really make sense, but consonantally we could make it work. And remember, the Hebrew text was originally written without consonants, so it's an option. I'd say it's a less likely option than option number 1, because option number 1 has some weird vowel stuff going on as well. But as we'll see, baka is a weird verb. So option 1, baka. Option 2, boch. Option 3 would be that we're missing R1, and that's either going to be a noon, which does not get assimilated, so that doesn't work, or a yod, in which case we'd have a sere prefix vowel. That's what we have. Okay, it's important to note, though, this is clearly a shortened form. One yod vav verbs do not get a shortened form in the preterite, jussive, vav relative imperfect. One yod vowels don't shorten. So we would fully expect to have a sere pattern here if this were yevech or yevach. Let's go ahead and go to the lexicon and see if yod, beit, kaf does show up. It doesn't, so that is not a verb. So option 3, a one yod, it might make sense of the sere, but it doesn't make sense of this shavah, and it's not even a verbal root that occurs in Hebrew, so we throw that out. So what are our two options as far as the root go? It's baka and it's boch. Obviously, we're looking at baka here because boch is not a verb that you've been introduced to, and so he's not going to use it here. But I want to pay attention to the fact that there are problems with both of those. Baka usually would have a heric prefix and then a segel here, and it doesn't have that. Boch should have a kametz here and a kibbutz under the beit. So both of them have vowel problems. Let's go back to, let's see here. Maybe it's this chapter. Yeah, here it is. Okay. So the verb form used is actually the jussive, not the imperfect, as is clear from the vav relative imperfect of some forms of third hay and hollow verbs. Okay, the vav relative imperfect, okay, he tells you it's actually the jussive. I don't know why he continues to use this imperfect terminology. How about the vav relative prefixed verb? That might be the best way to refer to it. Well, we see what happens with the vav relative in bana. It looks like we expect. You know, the jussive form of bana makes sense. The jussive form of baka, we would expect, you know, just like bana, you've got yivna, you get yivke. What happens to this in the jussive? Well, you still get the yiv, but the segel jumps back a letter. So does that happen in baka, where the segel jumps back a letter? No, it doesn't. You get this weird yev form, okay? So the irregularity here is with baka. Baka's jussive form is just different than what we expect in a lot of other third hay verbs. But this is the form that we see, so this is the form that we get. Baka is just a little bit weird with its vowels in the jussive form. No big deal. We know that now. If we read the book and we remembered the book, we would have noticed it at the time, hopefully, and so we remember that here. But when we look at these vowels, we're like, that doesn't really make sense. You just got to remember that baka is a little bit irregular in the jussive form, in the shortened form. In the preterite form, it's a little bit irregular, and so that's the explanation here. This is what we should expect to see. It's just a little bit irregular. So what we get is cow. I'm going to say vayiktol. You can say vav relative imperfect, vav relative jussive, vav relative preterite, whatever. And the yod without a suffix indicates 3ms from baka. All right. Let's take a look at number 9. Again, we're not going to spend as much time because, as you can see, it's essentially the same situation as we had up here with Allah. Instead of Allah, we have a saw. But it's that ayin, that R1 ayin, that is making the prefix letter, the prefix vowel, and the R1 vowel turn into the patach. Right? So we get essentially the same thing. We've got vav, patach, dagesh. We take that out. We know that vav, patach, dagesh goes on a prefixed form. So we know that yod is part of the prefix, not part of the root. We take that off. We get a sa. The only other options would be naas or ya'as, and those would all have different vowel patterns. If this were some sort of a hollow, it would be either is, os, or us. But again, not verbs we've seen. This must be a sa, because that's the only one of these options that we've actually seen in our vocabulary. So we get a cow. I would say vayiktol. You can say vav relative imperfect, vav relative jussive, vav relative preterite, whatever. The yod prefix with no suffix is 3ms, and our root is a saw. Number 10, we have vav, patach, dagesh. Take it off, we get t-pol, t-pol. All right, we know that tav has to be part of the prefix because vav, patach, dagesh goes on a prefixed form. So we take off the prefix, we're left with pe, lamed. We have to figure out what letter have we lost. Have we lost R3, pala? Well, we've not seen that before. Have we lost R2, peel, pole, or pool? I actually think pool is a verb. Pool, yeah. But it's not, it's not a verb. It's a noun. Okay. So maybe that's what I'm thinking of was, it's unlikely I was thinking of that now that I look at it. But either way, pala we've not had, peel, pole, pool we've not had that. Yafal, one yod, we would have a sere here, so it's not one yod. We haven't had yafal. We have had nafal. And we can see a nun assimilated into R2 in the dagesh. So the root here is almost certainly nafal. All right, we've got a cow. We've got either vayiktol or vav relative imperfect, vav relative jussive, vav relative preterite, whatever you want to call this. And then we've got a tav prefix with no suffix is either 3fs or 2ms. And of course our root is nafal. All right, I can't see my screen here, but we are 40 minutes in and we've only done section A. That is not a good rate of speed. So let me take a look here at the assignment. I'm going to do B, C, E, and F. B, C, E, and F. All right, B, obviously you're going to get the translations here. So what I'm going to say on B is, goodness, if you don't understand an answer that comes up in the answer key, let me know. Let me just go through these and I guess point out the roots, because that should solve any questions. So this one's pretty obviously zavach. This is on a perfect. So this is vav relative on a non-prefixed form. So that's going to be translated as future. When it's on a prefix form, it's going to be translated as past tense. So here again, on the perfect form, future, Allah. Here we've got Allah prefixed form, so that's going to be past tense. Here we've got kum prefixed form, so it's going to be arose, either she arose or you arose. Again, kum, this is a perfect form, kamta, but it's got the vav relative on it, so it's going to be you, sir, will arise. Here we've got amar. It's a prefixed form with the vav relative, so he said or and he said. Here we've got bacha. The noon prefix is 1 CP of the, so this would be we wept, and we wept. Number 9, roots. We've got the prefixed form, rootsu. This would be they ran, because again, vav relative on a prefixed form will be past tense. Number 10, we've got amad. So amad is he stood. It's a prefixed form, 1 CS, so I will stand, but the vav relative means that the prefixed form is actually past time. So I stood, basically. You have a vav kametz instead of a vav patak dagesh because aleph can't take the dagesh, so the patak lengthens to a kametz to compensate. All right, number 11, we've got u netatem. This is a very interesting one. Here the shurik, usually the shurik is going to occur on a bump letter, so bait, mem, or pay. Here we've got it on noon. Let's just settle the fact that this is, noon is going to be the prefix. So we've got tatain here. No, noon is not the prefix. Noon here, I guess the rule is this is a vav conjunction, I think. Let me go look at that. I don't think this is a vav relative. I think this is a vav conjunction because I think the vav conjunction, when it precedes a letter with a shavah, I think that is one situation in addition to bait, mem, and pay. I think that's one situation where there's shirk, but I'm going to check on that real quick. So this is the perfect form because we've got a tem suffix. Tem is cow perfect 2MP. And it's on natan, but the final noon gets assimilated into the tem prefix. So I think this is actually and he gave, because I think it's a vav conjunction rather than a vav relative. But I say that because I think the vav conjunction is the one that goes to shurik when it's preceded by a letter with a shavah. But maybe the vav relative does that as well. Let's go up into the chapter and look. The use of the vav relative, the form of the vav relative perfect. Okay. So the vav relative perfect is made up of the vav prefix to the perfect. Often but not always, the accent will move to the final syllable. Okay, so far there's nothing here about it going to shurik. So that's why I think when we go to the vav conjunction, I have to figure out where that happens. There we go. All right. Vav conjunction. Usually, you get a vav shavah. Sometimes you get a vav shurik in a bump situation. When it's before a letter with a hatef vowel, it gives the corresponding short vowel. So he doesn't cover the other one. Goodness gracious. I think I'm right about this. Let's find out what the answer key says. So we're in lesson 26. We're on B. And we're looking at gave. Okay, so 11. He says we'll give. So it must be that the shurik does occur with the vav relative. It's a darn shame that he would give you an exercise that uses that shurik rule, but he doesn't even discuss that in his chapter. What in the world? Why would he not discuss this in the form I guess, okay, I guess he doesn't discuss it, but he at least gives you an example. So I'm probably wrong. I'm probably mixed up. Now I need to go find out if the Vav conjunction ever goes to Shurek, not in the bump situation, but whenever it's before a letter with a Shavah. Because he's at least giving you that case here. Uk Taltem is a situation where the Vav relative goes to Shurek when it is followed by a letter with a vocal Shavah. So, good enough. I do think that Futato could be a little bit more clear about that and when that happens, but I'll accept it. Makes sense. We've got a Shurek here because we've got a Vav relative on, at the very least we can say, even if this Vav to Shurek happens both for the Vav relative and the Vav conjunction, in this case where it precedes a letter that has a Shavah, even if that happens in both, that at least, that's just like if it were a Vav Shavah elsewhere. You know, you can't necessarily tell the difference. We've basically been told that these are Vav relatives, whatever they look like. So what I'm saying is, like, look at number 2. Vezavehu. Technically, if you saw this in your text, you wouldn't know whether this is a Vav relative on a non-prefixed form or whether this is a Vav conjunction on a non-prefixed form. You technically wouldn't know that because there's no spelling difference between the two. That's either the case here, or Vav relative is the only time you'll go to Shurek before a Shavah. So, either way. I hope the last 5 minutes have made sense to you, because I'm kind of rambling as I'm figuring this out myself, but hopefully you're seeing the process of thinking through it and how you can think through these things. All right, so number 11, you all, masculine plural, will give. Number 12, here we've got, obviously, a Vav relative on a prefixed form. Then we've got Ayin Lamed, and Hey would be our missing letter. So this is a law. This is you all went up. Not you all, sorry. They went up. They, masculine plural, went up. All right, number 13, we've got Yada in here. Yadanu would be the cow perfect, 1 CP. So this would be I knew. But we've got the Vav relative here, most likely. So instead of Yadanu, it's Veyadanu, where this is probably getting pushed. The accent's probably getting pushed to the end here. Maybe. I don't know. I can't really tell. Either way, it's going to be a future time. So I will know. Or, sorry, not I will know. We will know. That is 1 CP. Number 14, Vayisa. Okay. Well, this is Nasa, is our root. Got a Vav relative on a prefixed form. The Yod prefix with no suffix indicates 3MS, so this is basically, and he went up. Nasa is to, and he took up. He lifted. Something like that. So Allah is to go up, Nasa is to lift up or to take up. Number 15, we've got Nafal here. The noon has assimilated into the pay. Yod prefix with no suffix is 3MS, so this would be, and he fell. Nafal, I'm pretty sure, is fell. If not, that's a terrible false mnemonic. But I am almost certain Nafal is he fell. Yeah, okay. Alright, I'm not sure what this means. This is the first time I've seen this little red thing up here. It looks like it means I'm recording, which I am, but I'm not recording in Logos, I'm just recording Logos. So that's weird. Alright, so we'll go back to our number 15. So basically, yeah, and he fell. All right, C. Let's see, we're doing A, B, C. We skip D. We do F. All right, A, B, C. All right, so we'll do one translation here. Let's go with number 6. It's pretty long. All right, we've got yakum. Yakum is obviously a verb. Kum is to arise, or to get up. Yod kametz indicates that we've got an account imperfect 3ms form, which would be he will arise and he will go, because this vav here is a vav relative. He will arise and he will go. I get the use of the vav relative on the prefixed form as part of narrative, a narrative feature. I am still trying to digest when you would use the vav relative on the unprefixed form. I'm trying to figure out, why is it better to say imperfect, vav relative perfect, instead of imperfect, vav conjunction imperfect. That's what I'm still trying to understand. But either way, translating this through, even though you can't tell the difference in form here between the vav relative and the vav conjunction, context indicates it wouldn't make sense to say he will rise and he went. That doesn't, those time conflicts don't really make sense. So it makes more sense to read this as a vav relative on a perfect, where we translate this as future as well. He will arise and he will go upon the path, haderech, upon the path, upon the way, and he will turn to, this is shuv, but it's a perfect form. Shuv becomes shav, and it's future because we've got the vav relative here. So shav by itself would be he turned, but we've got veshav, and so this is he will turn. Toward, I'm guessing. No, return to is how Futato. So a lot of options. If this is turn, you could say turn or turn into. Mishpacha. He will turn to his family. He will turn into his family. Those don't really make sense. But to turn back to, or to return to his family, that makes sense. Mishpacha, when we add the 3ms suffix, possessive suffix to that hey hardens into a tav so that it can hold the suffix. So this is his family. And nasa'u, or nasa'u, again, this is a suffix form, so unprefixed form, with the vav relative, which nasa'u would be he lifted up, or they lifted up. But with the vav relative, it becomes and they will lift up, or in this case, with avono, his transgression, they will forgive his transgression. Should be a hyphen there. All right, so that's C. Skip D, go to E. Am I right about that? Skip D, go to E. Yes, okay. So here we're just translating sentences with infinitive constructs forming temporal clauses. So here, kishloch, this would be shalach in the infinitive construct, to send, but obviously the kaf makes it contemporaneous. So when to send the man, so when the man sends, as the man sends the boy, or something like that. As he sends the boy. As he sends him, or it. And then Bakom, so when to arise, Oyev, enemy, but Oyevenu is going to be our enemies. So when our enemies rise against us, al, you could say upon us, or over us, but I think rise against us makes best sense here. Veshachavcha, so when you lie, and when you lie down, and when kumacha, when you arise. So it could be when you lie down and when you arise, or in your lying down and in your rising, something like that. Ka'alot, so this is to go up. When to go up, hakohanim, when the priests go up. All right, so here we have bet seito, so this is yatsa. One yod vav in the imperfect gets the seri seri pattern. One yod vav, or not the seri seri, in the imperfect gets the seri seri pattern. In the infinitive construct, it gets the segel segel tav. Well, here the aleph quiesces, and so instead of segel segel tav, when it quiesces, it can't hold a vowel, and so here the first segel lengthens to a seri. So seit, this is the infinitive construct of yatsa. Yatsa is he came out or came forth. So this is to come forth. This is when it or he comes forth, and when he comes out and when he goes in his coming out and in his going in. Number 8, ledet is from yalad, so beget. When beget ha'isha, or when to give birth the woman. When the woman gives birth to her son. This is ben with the comet's hay suffix, her. So benach is going to be her son. And then number 9 here, we've got when benot. So benot here is the infinitive form of banah, so building. The reason why we've got a hirik here is this was the bait preposition with the shavah. Whenever you have 2 shavahs in a row, the first one is going to become a hirik at the beginning, that is. So when to build you, so when you build an altar. Now, I think all of these assume that the object, or I should say that the suffix or that the noun following the infinitive, I think all of these assume that that noun or that suffix is the subject of the infinitive rather than the object of it, but it seems to make sense that way. All right, let's see, exercise F. Let's go with number 4 here. All right, so we have Vaya'alu. This is Allah. This is the Vav relative plus the prefixed form. So Allah means he went up. 3MP imperfect would mean they will go up, but the Vav relative converts that again to, and they went up. Giborei, the Gibor is the mighty ones or the warriors. Giborei, this is in construct, the mighty ones of the nations. So the warriors of the nations went up from Hayam, the sea, and let's see, Lakad is he took, I think. So Yil Kadu is going to be they will take, but the Vav relative makes it and they took, what did they take? Et arechem. They took your cities. This is Ir, but Ir becomes Arim in the plural, and Arim becomes Are in the construct. So the warriors of the nations went up from the sea, or came up from the sea, and they took your cities, and this is Lakah. They captured, so it would be they will capture, but the Vav relative makes it, and they captured what? Neshechem. This would be Nashim, women, but it's in the construct here, so your women. They captured your women, or your wives, and Benotechem, your daughters, and they Yivrahu. Barach. Is Barach the verb here? I do not recognize Barach. Let's go look that up. Barach. Oh, yeah. Okay. Whoops. All right. So the warriors of the nations went up from the sea, and they captured your cities, and they took your women or your wives and your daughters, and they fled. Again, they will flee, but Vav relative, they fled and did not Kala or Yakal. Probably Yakal. Yeah, because Tem, this is going to be perfect. So Yakal, this is to be able, and you were not able to stand against them. Mighty men of the nations came up from the sea, captured your cities, and took your wives and your daughters, and they fled, and you were not able to stand against them. Well, there you go. All right. So that's it for 26, I believe. That was F. Let's see here. F. Oh. E. Did I do E? Yeah, I did E. Okay. F. 27, we've got A, B, C, D, and F. So everything but E again. 27. All right, focus on temporal clauses. Okay. So here we've got, again, you don't usually have to translate this, but first here it's a good idea, just so I know you know what you're looking at. So Vayehi would be, and it happened that, or, and it was when to write the man the book. So basically, and it happened that when, I wouldn't even, basically, when the man wrote the book. And it will happen that when the man to write the book. So this now becomes future. So all this does is it sets the time. When the man wrote the book, when the man writes the book, or will write the book. After to write the book, so after he writes the book, and it was after he wrote, so after he wrote. Vayehi, this is a past time setter, and so here you would translate the infinitive as past, after he wrote the book. Vayehi ki ketav sefer, after, how does ki function here? I think I missed that. preposition or particle plus perfect. Oh, okay, I see what's happening. Yeah, this has to do with reading the Vayehi or Vehaya just as basically not translating it, just reading it as a time setter. So the way that you would go through and translate would basically be, sorry, I skipped over what I need to do. All right, so here, Vayehi ki, and it happened that he wrote the book. Well, you could translate this as when he wrote the book. Because it's not a preposition like up here, it's just Vayehi ki, and it happened that he wrote the book. So this isn't an infinitive, this is a perfect. And it happened, sure, I think that's like just as, or yeah, okay, just as. All right, so, and it happened that as Kotovo, as he was writing the book. So you wouldn't have to put it happened that. You could say, as he was writing the book. Lifnei, I guess it can be temporal. I'm so used to that being spatial that Lifnei Katav is hard for me, but this would basically be before he wrote the book. Here we've got, and it shall be in that day. So you could say, and it shall happen in that day, or in that day, ... And it happened that in the year, so in that year, so here in that day, here in that year. But recognize here we're talking about past, in that former year, here on that day, or in that future day. So again, setting it in the future. Kishpot, so to judge, as judging the Lord. So when the Lord judges the nations. And then number 10 here, setting it in the past, as the Lord judged his people. So here again, past tense. All right, let's look at, I guess we'll do number 6. They all look pretty much the same length. So, Vayehi lifnei zovhu. So, and it happened before to sacrifice so before he slaughtered the sacrifice. When you have that, you don't want to retranslate the and here. Excuse me. Before he slaughtered the sacrifice, this now becomes in English a dependent temporal clause. Before he slaughtered the sacrifice, neshev. So, neshev. This has got to be... I'm torn between yashav and shuv, and it's got to be yashav because we've got the sere here. It would usually be neshev, but the vav relative pulls the accent back, and so that sere reduces to a segel. If this were shuv, this would be na, nun, kametz, and then probably shin, shurik. Not shurik, shin, kibbutz, baked. So this is yeshev. This is we dwelt. So before he slaughtered the sacrifice, We dwelt, or we sat upon the ground. For he offered the sacrifice. See, I don't like offer there. I don't like offer for Zavak. I guess if you answered on the quiz, I'll count it right. But it's not very literal. It's quite interpretive. To say Zavak means offer, that's anyways, enough about that. All right, so just I guess I'll give you credit because he uses it that way. I don't want you to get confused, but I would say for Zavak, sacrifice or slaughter. All right, so that's B, C, D, and F. All right, so here we've got interrogative clauses. Again, most of this, I'm only saying this because I'm coming up on my deadline here, but most of this stuff is in your translation, should be pretty straightforward. If you have questions, send them my way. I'll be happy to focus on particular ones, but these should really be pretty straightforward. I'm not saying that you're not going to get any wrong. I'm just saying the answers in the back of the book should make sense. If they don't, let me know. All right. So here, parsing again. To save time, I'm just going to focus on, you've got the answers. I'm going to focus on what I think might be tricky. So Shakov T, this is strong, straightforward, no problem. Picard, regular. I mean, what are we even? These seem really easy, and I'm not sure why. Malachta, it's so confusing to me that this is just reviewing basic parsing, but okay. Zakar Tem, Zakar, Ketov, Darash, Davach, Akal, Asaf. All of these are really straightforward. So I think that's just reviewing basic Cal strong, Cal perfect, and strong Cal imperfect conjugations. Pretty straightforward there. And then we're skipping E and going to F. All right, so let's do, I guess, number 3 here. Vayehi, so again, setting the scene in the past. Bilkod, so this is lakad with the bait preposition. So when to take, o yevenu. So when our enemies took past tense because it's set in the past. When our enemies took what? Mishpachotenu, took our families. Mishpachot is from mishpacha, family. Mishpacha becomes mishpachot, families. And then this sereyodnu, this is what gets added to a plural noun to indicate possession. So when our enemies took our families, and again, because we've got the vav relative plus the infinitive, temporal infinitive, we're going to translate that as a dependent clause. So we're not going to say and here. We're just going to go into the independent clause. So when our enemies took our families, they took them to. So otam is the definite direct object marker with the 3mp suffix, them. They took, lakach, they took them to Eretz with a 3mp suffix. So artsam, they took them to a land. They took them to their land, the land of them. And here we've got Asar. So, let's see. Yeah, the segel here is just this. Okay, so there's 2 different types of one aleph. One of those does the holum, and the other one does the segel here. So Asar is the one that does the segel. So Asar, he imprisoned or he bound. 3 MP in the Cal imperfect, they will imprison, but the Vav relative, and they imprisoned them. So When our enemies took our families, they took them to their land, and they imprisoned them. And we said, Amar, and we said, Neilcha. So this is going to be, this is an interesting one. This is halach. Remember, halach often conjugates like a one yod, vav, and so it gets the sere pattern. Well, okay, so now we have one CP. Neilcha, the comets hey makes it cohortative. So, and we said, let us go, achreihem, after them. Pen usually negates a, basically like the word lest. Lest or unless maybe. Let us go after them, lest they, 3MP, Yod, Shurik, lest they perish. Alright? So when our enemies captured our families, they took them to their country, I said land, and imprisoned them. Then we said, let's go after them lest they perish. Alright, so that was F. There we have it. Alright, so we're good. Hopefully, that's clear. If you have any questions, send them my way. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a great weekend, and we'll see you next time.